Hi, I'm Corey Driver, and this is Moving Forward. So this week we are in Mark 8 and Genesis 17. The flow of the week, I'd like to give a little context for the Mark 8 passage, circle back to Genesis 17, and then carry a theme through to Mark 8 again. And the theme for today is accepting God's grace. First, some context on Mark 8. So, verse 34 says that Jesus calls the crowd together with the disciples and says a thing. And the question is, what crowd? Where is this crowd from? What's going on? This is the first mention of the crowd. But what you need to know is that verse 27 tells us that this is in the villages or in the region of Caesarea Philippi. When you hear Caesarea Philippi in the New Testament, you have to think Paneas, or Banias, as it's known today. This is the gate of Hades, right? This is a place of counterfeit worship of Greco-Canaanite gods who die in the dry season and then come back in the wet season, right? And so ritually there are crowds there who engage in all kinds of nasty worship. If you've been following this channel at all, every time Caesarea Philippi comes up, please think Paneas, counterfeit worship of dead and rising gods, right? That the people have to go yearly, at least a couple times, to beg to come back to life. God, please come back to life. Gods, please come back to life and spare my life another year. So there's these people, they're begging for their lives, for crops to grow, for the rains to come back. And so you have this cycle of pleading, folks going to try and save their own lives from these gods that are dying, and then they're trying to beg them to come back to life, mostly through arousing worship that is frankly kind of gross. So anyway, that's the context, right? So you need to know that when you're reading Mark 8. Verse 27 is cluing you in that Jesus is taking his disciples to a counterfeit worship of other gods who are promising to save lives, but can't even save their own lives, right? And so you need that context, and that there's a crowd there worshiping, trying to save their own lives through essentially orgies with animals to false gods. Okay, so that's the crowd. Need that. Circle back to Genesis 17, and God is giving Abraham a little too much grace, right? So God has appeared to Abraham before. God will appear to Abraham again, and this time God is showing up to Avram, not Avraham yet, Avram, and saying, look, I'm going to cut a covenant with you. I need you to cut a covenant with me. And so God is promising descendants and just fruit beyond measure in terms of children and a great nation, and it's going to go great. And Avram can't believe it, right? And God even renames Avram to Avraham or Abraham. You will be a father of a nation, a father of a great nation. And God also renames Sarai, right? Like, my prince is ... not princess, right? But we don't know the name of the God that Sarai was saying her prince was, right? Like, that's her parents named her that. So probably Sarai Sin, the moon god of Ur and Haran, so the towns that they were frequenting. So Sarai Sin gets renamed to Sarah, princess, right? Like a princess in her own right, no longer proclaiming that a fake deity was her prince. And so there's this renaming, and that's great. And Abraham and Sarah get to live in God's presence. And God says, also, you're going to have some kids, like You're going to have a nation. And Abraham thinks, this is too much. This is too much grace. How can, Abraham laughs. Says, haha, that's, all well and good. Let Ishmael live in your sight, right? Abraham has had a son with Hagar, the servant of Sarah, and Abraham says, good story, God. Thanks for the renaming. Cool. Appreciate the nations coming forth from me. But I have a son. Just multiply him. And Abraham is God's friend. And God says, okay, because you've requested, Ishmael will issue forth nations as well. 12 tribes, 12 princes will come from him. And so we shouldn't feel bad for Ishmael, right? Like he does quite well. But God said, no, Sarah is a princess, princess, because kings will issue forth from her as well. And Abraham laughs at this because he can't even conceive of God being so gracious. And God says, all right, so your son from Sarah is going to be named Yitzhak, right? Like he laughs because he laughed. And there's other reasons presented in the text why Isaac's name, Yitzhak, would be he laughs, but that's one of them. So Isaac will always be he laughs to Abraham because Abraham couldn't believe, couldn't take seriously. Abraham laughed at God's grace in the provision of a son. Fast forward a couple hundred years, Jesus takes his disciples to the region of Caesarea Philippi, to the site of counterfeit worship, and says, here's how your lives are actually going to be saved. I am going to be tormented. I am going to be turned over to people who are going to mock me. I am going to be crucified. I'm going to be killed. And then I will rise, right? Not these fake gods. Not that you have to beg, right? Quit trying to save your own life. You can't do it. It's not possible. Quit trying to beg gods to please come back to life and give me another year of life. You don't have to do any of that. It's not up to us. We can't save our own life. Whoever tries to save your life is going to lose it, right? Like, quit trying. Quit trying. Jesus is going to take care of it. Jesus is going to die to put to an end the powers of sin and death that humans have sold ourselves into. Jesus says, I'm going to take care of it. And Peter is a great disciple, right? He's a great disciple. He thinks, like Jesus is discouraged. Some things haven't gone as well, like the secret's getting out. I'll just talk to him. So Peter, good boundaries, takes Jesus aside, explains to him, look, like you talked about being killed. I don't think that'll happen, right? Like you're the Messiah. You got to just believe in yourself. You're sounding kind of defeatist. And Jesus says, get behind me, accuser. Not like proper noun, right? Like this isn't calling Jesus or calling Peter the devil. That's not it. Jesus is saying like Satan, right? Like accuser or opposer, right? Like get behind me, you're opposing me. You don't know, right? You're thinking of human things. You're doing what these people are trying to do. Just save lives through your own effort. But I'm telling you that God has a different plan. God is going to save lives through Jesus unjustly being murdered by the state to enter the realms of sin and death and rescue everybody back. Because we could never rescue ourselves, right? And that's the point of God's graciousness. Peter can't get it because nobody can get it, because I can't get it, because you can't get it, because it doesn't make any sense, right? God is going to do all the work. God is going to act graciously when we can't even conceive of God taking care of us. And so, we try to save ourselves. We try to do everything right. We try to earn our own salvation. We try to be better than such and such. And it's not enough. And God comes in that and saves us in spite of us never being able to do it enough. Now, y'all know me, right? And hopefully y'all are reading the Bible, right? Like, God does command us to do justice. Jesus does command us to love our neighbors. That's not some trick to get us to recognize our own sinfulness, right? Like, it should be plentiful apparent, right? Like, we know that we're sinful. Also, love your neighbor as yourself, right? Like, it's not an excuse to stop trying. God's grace, is not like, okay, now don't worry about anything. Don't worry about anything. Do live in a loving community that God creates and empowers through God's Spirit and through the teaching of Jesus and through the commandments that God gives God's people, right? So it's not a escape clause, right? At the same time, it is an escape clause from sin and death as natural consequences of what we've done and who we've been and how we have failed to love our neighbors as ourselves. We can't save ourselves. If we try, we're like those folks at Panias. We're like those folks at Caesarea Philippi, just begging systems that don't work. It might rain in the spring, it might rain in the fall, it might not. But none of our begging, none of our counterfeit sacrifice changes anything, right? Doesn't change God's mind. God's already decided to love graciously, right? Abraham begging God to just use Ishmael, who's already been born, doesn't change God's mind, right? Like, God has already decided that Sarah is going to be a mother of kings. Can't stop God's grace. Jesus shows up at a site of counterfeit worship because he's already decided that he will rescue humans from the powers of sin and death. Can't stop it, And if you're Peter, you might say, like, Jesus, you encountering and experiencing death on the behalf of these people and us, it's just crazy, right? Like, that's too much. And Jesus says, you're just thinking humanly. You don't have on your mind the things of God. And I think that's the really good news for us this week. You don't have to think humanly. We can have on our minds the things of God, and the things of God are grace when people don't deserve it. When we want to say, it's too much, that's too good. People should suffer for what they've done. Probably. But that's not the way of God. That's the way of humans, right? God says, I love you. Jesus says, I'm going to save you from the mess you've gotten yourselves in. And we get to live that truth. And we get to try to be gracious as God is gracious to us. And that is really good news. Friends, this is my last video for a while. I am going on paternity leave soon, hopefully. And so over the next several weeks, the staff of the Indiana-Kentucky Synod is going to continue making these videos. I am deeply grateful to them. So you're going to see some familiar faces if you're from the Synod, and if you're not, some new faces. So I hope you really enjoy that. I just am so grateful and appreciate folks stepping in to help me out while I am hopefully taking care of a new baby. So see y'all in a while, and keep moving forward.